All right, friends, we're going to get started. Thanks so much. We're now live via Facebook and we are a go. I would like to welcome you all to the webinar. Today is, I don't even know what today is. Today is Thursday, May 23rd, 2019, and we're joined by Canon Vickers. She is serving as the Canon for Parish Finance and the Canon for Finance and Administration for the Diocese of Southwest Florida. So Anne is going to be talking about how strategic planning and financial management kind of align. And Anne, I'm not sure about you, but when I think about what you're going to be presenting today, it reminded me of the hedgehog concept developed by Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great. Do you know what I'm talking about? You know, that age-old book many people quote. And so I was thinking about the hedgehog concept, which is kind of a three-way circle Venn diagram. And the first circle is what are you the best in the world at? The second is what are you what are you deeply passionate about? And the third one, and I think this is the one we're really going to focus on today, is what drives your economic engine. So when those three things emerge, I mean, you're unstoppable, you're unbeatable, you're really living into the mission. And sometimes I think in the world of church finance, we forget the import of what's fueling our mission, and oftentimes that is financial resources. So I'm really glad to be joined by you today to go over a little bit of housekeeping for those of you who have joined us. If you're not familiar with Zoom, the bottom line, the bottom tab, it's kind of a ribbon. If you have any questions, there's a chat box. Now this is a little confusing. There's one called Q&A. We're really going to focus in the chat. So if you have any questions you'd like to ask, just double click that chat box and submit any questions. There are going to be a few times throughout the presentation that Anne will pause and we'll be able to ask questions live. So feel free to post your questions in the chat box and I'll be able to relay them to Anne. Without further ado, Canon Vickers, thanks so much for your time today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Melissa, and everyone at ECF. My name is Anne, and I'm here to talk to you about the weather. As we've probably been looking at these clouds in this scene over the last 15 minutes waiting for this webinar to start. But more specifically, I will talk about what inspires congregations to make sound financial management a priority. I mean, who is doing that? Why are they doing that? We all are hearing the weather report, the messages about decline. We're eagerly, at the same time, greeting opportunities for planting new churches and approaching ministry in new ways. We pray, we have faith, but ultimately financial management is involved because our long-term sustainability depends on it. We're constantly shifting in the form of demographics in our communities, and our church is evolving constantly as our ministries and ministers serving the world today. So first, let me tell you a little bit, because I know from how many of you are here, I just need to have the right clicker, that some of you are from local vestries and you may not necessarily know yet about what a diocese is. So before we start, let me give you a little bit of background on my perspective. I'm the canon, which serves a bishop for finance and administration in the Diocese of Southwest Florida. Here's our shield. It's a diocesan shield. Here's our office. We call it Diocesan House. There's a bishop, quite literally. And last week, we just laid new mulch. So we get just as excited as every other American about taking a picture of our mulch. This diocesan office serves 77 churches. It's a bell curve of every shape and size, from 20 members to 850. Our oldest church is 150 years old, and our newest two are being planted right now. I've been in this role for 10 years, since 2009, which, if you remember, was a pretty tricky time economically. And so we started together in my call in economic recovery and mapping out a framework to prepare for all kinds of weather in the future. In Florida, we're preparing for weather literally, with hurricanes. We see the impact of climate change and sea level forecasts. Our demographic forecasts are just as newsworthy, with steadily declining areas in some and others quickly popping up seemingly overnight. Having grown up in the church, I've seen its evolution. I've witnessed General Convention. I've studied many white papers about clergy pension plan revisions. And so as an analyst, I even more than ever crave data with my constant question of what story do your numbers tell? And I love to sail. So for this webinar, we're going to use an analogy of sailing and the weather, because I think we can all engage and understand the things that are involved in that arena. So some of you are members of a congregation. You're on a vessel of many types. In our church, there are probably 7,000 different vessels. There are also organizations serving these congregations with resources, whether they're launching vessels, serving them, creating them, or connecting the people of the world to everything that we do. What a blessing. I mean, we are called to this in our history, and we will be doing this in perpetuity. But the trick with the Episcopal Church in general, and our greatest blessing in my view, is the diocese. Now, not to make too big of a deal about it, but I consider the diocese the Coast Guard, the local Coast Guard in each diocese who understands the local waters. Visualize semper paratus, always ready. In fact, when I went to find a picture of the Coast Guard, I see this shield celebrating 225 years of existence, which is roughly the same as our Episcopal Church. As the first General Convention of the Episcopal Church adopted a constitution and canons in 1787. As someone who attends a vestry retreat every May, I know it's worth mentioning that this denominational structure is a key component of governance in the Episcopal Church, and not one that is always expected or understood by new vestry members. So the diocesan role is also to guide and support, to interpret and watch over. It's not in itself a cruise boat or a pleasure craft. And like the Coast Guard Auxiliary, it often includes others beyond the bishop's staff, networks of volunteers involved in this ministry, councils, finance committees, fund board, audit committees, stewardship coaches. What we have here is a system. It's a system of integrated support that, in my view, has 5 key components that inspire congregations to engage. They build on one another, starting with transparency and accountability at the core, adding then necessary frameworks for understanding, allowing data-driven decisions, always involving a circle of communication and anticipating impact. Now, before I start, I want to make a note. I already told Melissa that I get really excited talking about these, especially when the charts and the numbers come out. So I've built into this presentation a analogous pause, a no-wake, idle speed zone, so to speak. And that is when we would love to have your questions. And I'm also used to seeing audiences and knowing where they come from or what their perspective might be. And so in this webinar situation, I hope that you'll enter your questions soon as you think them, and often, because Melissa and I are pretty excited about incorporating your comments and questions into our conversation in this recording. So if you feel like noting a question, which perspective you have from a congregation or a diocesan resource or one of the other institutional resources we have, please feel free to do that as well. Now, we get started with transparency and accountability. It all starts with the vestry of a congregation. Now, it may be a bishop's committee, pioneers, missioners. We are all called to serve, and some of us are ordained. An elected vestry, standing up and engaged, at the helm, monitoring, listening, deciding, acting. Nothing happens without this. The congregation annual meetings is so very important to see the strategic planning process in action. I go to those, 4 of them every January, and I tell you, it's not just about the printed financial reports or the narratives or the elections. Those are all important, but it's an understanding, a collective understanding about what story the numbers tell, about the prior year, about the upcoming year. Are there headwinds or tailwinds? Is it sunny or stormy? Because the reality is, you wouldn't board that vessel unless you knew who's driving the boat and where are we going. These are requirements of congregations anyway, for good reason. If you look at the Constitution and canons, these rules have been in place since 1789, just like the Coast Guard. Coast Guard can't do its job without a radar, without VHF radio, and a diocese and the church cannot function as intended either without these core pieces of information. There's canon law for parochial reporting that applies to all of us, even includes dates and deadlines, March 1st to be specific. There's canons related to audits after the year has occurred with more deadlines in September. Now, there's flexibility in how these are carried out, but these are canonical requirements of every organization, parish, mission, and otherwise, under the authority of the church. So as you look at this slide, if you start feeling like, hey, I don't think we have this data, if you're a diocese or a church, you know your first step. You follow the canons. If you're saying, I can't perform an audit without anything, I can't perform it every year, well, then you know the next step. And we have to talk about them as well. But we don't just focus on the past, because once you have those 2 things, you start saying, hey, let's impact the future. Let's ask for the budget. Let's get out in front of the decisions and support while we have time ahead of us to make adjustments. Then, once everyone starts flowing, you ask for more, other items one at a time until all of a sudden it works. Now, many people don't believe me when I talk about how important this is, so I'm going to show you this picture. And I must show this to have you believe me that it is absolutely and completely required for the functions to work. In my view, it's not even an option to do it only halfway. So here, for example, shows the log that we keep of when all of our congregations turn in all of these things. So like I was saying, it starts with a parochial report or maybe in our annual certificate, and then you want to proof the numbers, so you take a look at a balance sheet and an income statement. That in itself starts to increase the awareness about the importance of good financial management. Grabbing the budget, talking about the budget, proves that we care about the future and that we want to engage not as a story after the fact, but while there's still time to do something. Then you get into accordingly, just like the Coast Guard not doing its job where they say, I request to know your bylaws. Remind me of your endowment policy. Oh, you don't have an endowment policy. Let's talk. What's the safeguarding policy? What leases are in care right now? What perpetual care policy do you have for Memorial Gardens? Most importantly, if there's no response, that means something. Because the regular activity on the channel connects and reinforces our awareness of each other, and it is required for it to work. Fortunately, I started this job in the age where technology enables it. We scan all of these documents. We build a mine of institutional history for the future generations of those congregations. And at the same time, you build a treasure chest of fantastic examples. My favorite part is when the congregation will now start calling to ask for a copy of their income statement from the prior year because they depend and know that it's available. It takes time to shift a culture to a culture of transparency and accountability, but this nitty-gritty is critical because the church is not just the average, it's not just the sum. The diocese is not the sum of the congregations. When you disaggregate those totals, you can see, as in this example for the change in operating income from 2016 to 2017, that there are a number of individual scenarios that are virtually opposite. This many churches below the line went down in operating income. This many churches above the line increased. So you're able to engage in conversation about the common and sometimes opposite trends happening at the same time this year and in the context of the history and future. Financial management wise, it's not just about the top line. So when you compare those sources of income, the expenses over time, this is where it gets good. Because again, every church is different. Financial viability looks different. Every church has a different approach and opportunity in front of it, and every church is ultimately responsible and accountable for viability. These 4 charts are all great trends. They're all sustainable congregations, yet very different in their sources of income, in the timing of their projects, and in what is generally approaching them as they move forward. These 4 charts, on the other hand, are all trends that require some sort of safety net, some sort of conversation of assistance, some sort of, hey, what's going on? We need to understand the next step for this ministry. Now, right now, someone should be typing, there's no way we could ever get this information, by the way. So if you haven't, go ahead and start typing that. But it's not just about business. It's not just about financial management. Measuring missions, studying our neighborhood, that is a part of our measuring and transparency and accountability as well. So the Episcopal Church wisely updated the parochial report metrics and probably will continue to do so.
And
but in 2017, yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have a very specific question that I feel like if you're able to back up one chart, somebody asked, what do all the colors represent in these charts?
Great. These colors represent the sources of income. Oh, I've got a chart lover on this webinar. Thank you for joining, especially the chart lover. And so just to, in total, because you might want to review the slides after the fact, but the general concept is that the purple represents the plate and pledge income, which is line 4 on the parochial report. And then the other lines on the parochial report, which would address other sources of income, whether it be from investments or other operations, are in yellow, and assistance from the diocese in this case is orange, and capital income is green. So when I get to the next couple slides, I'll tell you how you'll be able to have this information as well.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought it was very relevant.
Anytime. Please do. I love it. That makes sure I know everyone's with me. So for those of you who care more, who care about other metrics that don't have the little dollar sign on there, this is very exciting to me and us all as well, because measuring mission, measuring hours, number of people doing the things that the church does has started. And now after this year, 2018, I believe we have 2 years. I know we have 2 years of data to analyze. More on that later. Now, where is all of this information? The Episcopal Church, at its various websites of repository of data, collects and stores and processes and does all sorts of things for this information. So if you are a treasurer or the local rector or priest in charge, you know that there's an online parochial report filing site. And every year, some poor soul on your staff is going in and filling out, collecting all of these questions, these answers about everything from membership to baptisms to stewardship to mission. But what you may not know is the same place that you go to do this every March, you can also download the history, which currently goes back to the year 1999. So if you would like to create, for example, charts similar to those that I just showed, you could do that and see a history, an institutional history using the parochial report information that has been filed for your congregation. 6,500 congregations file this report every year. This destination, this TEC resource in my analogy is the shipyard, the boat launch, the design center for all of our vessels. And you have this analysis ability going backwards. In addition, besides just looking at yourself, the sites that are coordinated with the parochial reporting also include links for studying your congregation's community, a demographic report, if you will, that is custom made for your geographic area. And that is a resource to you as well when you're looking at what's going on in your local neighborhood. And again, this slide deck will be available at the end so that you'll have these links to use later. There's also several reports in Spanish and English that summarize the parochial data at a very high level. This is the data that fuels the state of the church at a high level, the international weather report. It's often broken down into diocesan or province level, breaking it down even more useful. You can look at these weather news reports and they might confirm your suspicions or cause alarm or even despair. But in this aggregate view, a substantial portion of the local story is not articulated. And that is where I would like to explain the confidence and the inspiration comes from. And this, therefore, is where frameworks become key. So here I am, slowing down in my no-wake zone to see if there are any other questions.
Somebody did say, will we get the slides later? And yes, we absolutely will be posting the recording along with the slides for your individual use. And other than that, we don't have any other questions. Again, friends, feel free to use your chat box and we will try and ask Anne those questions at either these pauses or in the midst of her presentation. Back to you, Anne.
Okay, great. So now moving on to frameworks for understanding. Now, those of you congregation vestry leaders, once you're elected, what do you get? Is it an inspiring box of suggestions or a pile of papers from the years past full of suggestions? Is it bills and a login to your QuickBooks account for the church? Is it a honey-do list listing all the things that need to be fixed, repaired, organized, or otherwise defined that have probably been on that honey-do list for the last several terms? Or is it a sign and just a notice boldly stating that the vestry has always met on the third Thursday of the month at 6 p.m. in the library, and you're going to hear from Stan how it's been done here for decades? These are all possible frameworks. Are they good frameworks? If you can go beyond, as many of you do, the congregation history and culture to learn about the roles and broaden the perspectives and network with other vestry leaders, there's a lot to understand. Canons, laws, concept, goals, expectations, what is feasible, what God showing us collectively in our neighborhoods. You probably are, and if not, I would find out if you can gather at a diocesan vestry retreat of sorts. Perhaps there are workshops at convention or other times in the year. But even then, the attention time is really pretty short. And as we can see, we do an annual vestry retreat. The rotation of the vestry, every year it's a different group. So we give the same information, but yet we still need to reinforce over and over again. And so sharing frameworks for understanding that are consistent and digestible and are able to be built on by a group rather than just one super whiz finance person on the vestry is really important. So sharing news about financial management in this case that people can talk about. So one example of what we do that has been received very well is called a benchmark report. And this actual report that we create, the PDF of it will be available as well with the slides. But I want to highlight some of the points because it's the format, the framework of the news. so to speak, that is the inspiring part, the helpful part to create that confidence at the vestry level. We're taking very wide general concepts of financial management down to the narrow view. Endowments, debt, property usage, capital campaigns, balanced budgets, all of these things are 8 different topics that we want to review every year. These are the core components of financial management. And for many of us who didn't take a class ever, this is the time where you'll learn about the difference between an endowment and a savings account, for example. And for pretty much everybody, this is where you'll learn about canonical and legal requirements, laws related to fiduciary responsibility, which you didn't even think were laws until recently. Laws, canon laws, which you need to understand why those are important in the first place, but then how they impact the obtaining of debt. What's required when you want to take out a loan? Um, Best practices apply to all of us. Opportunities apply to all of us. Some might say, oh, this endowment page, it only applies to the endowed parishes, or it only applies to the larger of us. But no, actually, every congregation should have an endowment. Every congregation has a legacy in front of it of some sort. And so we literally, the news here is we are hunting down the last 7 churches who don't have an endowment, just to help make that point of why and understand how it would be appropriate for each of our individual churches. Knowing that the others are doing, knowing where you are in relation to others doing, is very helpful for a vestry person. Also, there's canonical law to execute in relation to even the use of property. And property usage can really enhance the resources that you have available, whether it's leasing out space to another organization or to a school, a cell phone tower even, group meetings, hosting another worshiping community, even if it's temporarily. Here are cases where mission and financial topics meet, where you see literally how our impact in our neighborhood and in our world has a dollar sign related to it. And our ability to do more of that is enhanced when we manage those financial aspects and the legal aspects well. So our role at the diocesan level is to make sure that everyone understands, but also to connect, to discern the possibilities for capital planning. Some might say not only our largest churches do capital campaigns. When you look at the data, every church is doing some sort of capital project. Now, it may not have a glossy brochure and be over $1 million goal, but at least every church in Florida has an air conditioner and it breaks, or the roofs leak. And those 2 things alone account for most of what I see our capital campaigns focused on or around at each time. And sometimes things like hurricanes can really disrupt your timing and create more urgency around what you need to do capital-wise. So our role, and everyone should know where they can turn to have support when those moments come, whether it's Episcopal Relief and Development, whether it's Episcopal Church Foundation. Being able to connect to those resources is a huge part of the framework that should be understood, and that therefore would be inspiring. So the next resource destination I want to highlight is the Episcopal Church Foundation. They've been a partner of us as a diocese and for our congregations in all categories of stewardship. And in particular, what my favorite is the area in planned giving and how that relates to an endowment and to a legacy. Every congregation and should have a legacy society, a legacy awareness for who is involved in thinking for the long term of that life of that congregation. And thinking that way at all times really transforms the discussion about financial management for the decisions that you will have. I'll pause again to ask if there's any questions about the frameworks.
None so far.
Okay,
You know what? That's not
great.
true.
Well,
I'm going to go back to one. We did get an idea from someone about the endowment. There seems to be a little bit of pushback because there seems to be some type of research that's been done that churches who tend to have larger endowments have a harder time raising money. And so there was a little bit of a question, like, what's your experience in the overall willingness or ability for people to give once an endowment has been established?
I love that question. I did not, for the record, plant that question with you.
Mm-mm.
So, what I'm going to say is the example that we've seen is 4 years ago in 2014, we started a pooled investment, pooled endowment program. We call it the Diocesan Endowment Management Program. And the reason we did it was for the small churches to be able to piggyback and learn about having an endowment and all of the roles and responsibilities that relate to that. And so it was intended for churches that would start with $500 or $1,000 just to get started. Well, through those 4 years of watching each of their situations, and I watch it because literally we're watching the deposits and the withdrawals, and I noticed that the small congregations, once started it, and once they've got their head in the right framework, are getting regular contributions almost every other month because they're aware and because even though they're small, it's an engaging topic. It's an inspiring topic. People want to be a part of that sort of thing. So whether it's on their birthday or whether it's on their, a key moment in their life, they're making there's action, there's activity. Well, so that started happening and we start talking about it. And then the larger churches say, well, I want to get into that pool because apparently that's how things start happening. So to your point, did those larger endowments become quiet or just not active? And I would say that yes, it does come down to just the activity, just the talking, just the awareness. So yes, the larger endowments could do it on their own, but sometimes it's a lot to just find the right people who want to talk about that or to, have to pull together a program or, go online and figure out what steps you're going to take. And so even making that easy, making there easily be some regular way to be aware of your legacy assets is really, and I can prove it, all that it takes to have more contributions. And those contributions, which were starting out at maybe $100 or $235 a month, there was one case where then that church received a bequest for $500,000. And then
Mm.
boom, they're into that large endowment category. So the behavior that you want is the same, whether they're small or large. And it is awareness and constant talking about it.
Okay. My
Thanks
own
for that
follow-up,
question.
my own follow-up question to that. I am familiar of a few churches who have never really had a significant endowment in the past and have received a huge bequest, say $2 million. And they have noticed a drop in their own overall stewardship effort because of, I guess, the perception that they're good now. So I'm
Right?
wondering if you
It
can
kills
speak
it.
into that.
Sure. And that there you're talking about the discipline and the framework of the spending rule. So when you learn about what you want in your endowment policy to define as a appropriate spending rule for the long term, 3 to 5% using a trailing 12 quarter average, as an example, a good one, then it's good to take those funds out, but that is a specific level of withdrawal, of distribution. And that would be continuing in perpetuity
Mm.
and safely, and everyone can know that and feel good about what they're taking out. You want that behavior. What you don't want is the balancing of the budget with the endowment or balancing the budget with any of your reserves. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the next couple slides.
Great. Thanks, Anne.
Okay. So data-driven decisions. How tiny are these? Back to the colors, and I showed you the good charts and the bad charts. There are 77 ways we have 77 churches to be viable, to have a floating boat. So as you can see, much data is available. And once you start serving it up in digestible frameworks, there's going to be questions. There's going to be scrutiny. There's going to be people saying, I didn't fill out the parochial report correctly all those years. It's setting you up for well-framed future decisions by simply looking at the information that is there. So just like there are myriad styles of vessels in the sea, there are 100 ways to be sustainable. There's not just one way, but they all involve balanced budgets. In other words, they all must float. So when you take, once again, the sum of all of the budgets for a group of churches, whether it's a diocese or the whole Episcopal Church, and you disaggregate that and understand the individual is important, the individual set of data is important. Here is where those who serve our congregations know where we need to act. This is our safety net zone. This particular chart here shows the operating the budget surplus or deficit. If the lines are below the 0 bar, those are deficits. If the line is above the bar, those are surpluses. Believe it or not, apparently there's some surplus budgets here. And most in the middle are balanced, good old-fashioned balanced budget. Now we know we need to call right away and work with those with the deficits. Those are the cases that you, like for example, Melissa, where people perhaps see a deficit in their budget that's presented at their annual meeting, but yet they're not worried because, well, it'll come from the endowment. You know, they'll take care of it. They're not having that conversation of this is not sustainable and why. And so changing that budget framework so that the appropriate amount is taken from that resource, that legacy, that endowment, and then there is a deficit that matters, that would result in decisions to make big changes. That's the conversation that needs to happen in that first quarter of the year, ideally in the fourth quarter of the year prior. We had an example where, so we get the budgets in March in my office, but over the years of doing this, now we have calls where folks will want to talk about their budget in November, December, because they know that safety net's going to pop in and see what we need to do to help. So I was meeting with a vestry that similarly was not as motivated to care about their deficit. And sitting around, they had funded their deficit with the reserves and unrestricted funds for years, but that timer was getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so I used the example of you as a vestry are walking into that corner. You're closer and closer to that corner. And you have, as you reach the corner, less and less options of what to do. So our role here is to stand with you when you're away from the corner as a vestry and look at all of these things that we can do, even though you may still be heading towards it while we have the options, rather than allow something more dramatic to happen as you reach that corner. And the thing that made the point, sometimes they get it right away, but sometimes they always get it when you go around the room and you ask, what are your terms on your vestry? Like, have you just started or are you on your third year? So the ones that are on their third year, they probably care a little less. But the ones who are just on, who are going to be there in 3 years, serving on the vestry, when they're in that corner and the timer has run out on the reserves, they really care. And they're the ones who step up and stand and say, you know, we really need to focus on this now while we have more options. So data-driven decisions about budgeting, it's really helpful to have benchmarking, to have what are other churches doing? What are the average amounts spent on staff? You know, for example, benchmarking best practices, benchmarking against not only each other here, but in the nation. Again, we're considering canonical laws. Most of the expenses of a budget are related to staff and compensation. So we have canons about the denominational health plan and lay pension. We have rules and laws of the US that are changing regularly regarding Medicare and taxes and Affordable Care Act. So all of these things are part of the framework that vestries have to consider. And if you think that clergy and lay compensation is easy, 3/4, the lion's share of the budget, making that decision about your staff, full-time versus part-time priest in charge, how many, part-time positions and what functions are the most important. Those are key decisions that aren't financial other than the salary, but they have really important, they're tied. So you're talking about the dollars and you're talking about the functions and the roles of the humans who are going to be in those positions. So what's very, very helpful in this whole category is the church pension group. They are, in my analogy, the engineers that make ships great, like that show, Mighty Ships, the cruise lines, the big brochures with all the excursions. And it's because they're intricately tied to the congregation's administration. I mean, they provide the data and the administration and the expert systematic manipulation, appropriately, of complex topics like pensions, retirement, healthcare insurance, dealing with Medicare, dealing with short-term disability, property and casualty insurance. Not every new vestry member knows that the church pension group, their companies were created by the Episcopal Church 100 years ago to serve the Episcopal Church and its employees. Not every new vestry member is aware that they have the unique abilities relative to others in the marketplace to have levers at different diocesan levels or congregation levels to make local changes and shifts and guidelines that are appropriate for each diocese and area, so that you can have meaningful choices and education and engagement in those decisions that protect and sustain our ministry.
And we got another question.
All
And
right.
another question pertinent to the last slide. It was a question, did the budgeted outreach include diocesan contribution?
Maybe they mean the apportionment or assessment that the congregation pays to the diocese. And in this case, no. In our case, this would that's a given. So because it doesn't vary, we have that listed as in the other category as apportionment. In our case, is what it's called.
What about apportionment to tech, DFMS?
Likewise, because that would be a function of the diocesan assessment. That would be about 1.5% of that. That in my chart we don't count that, but that clearly is outreach at the largest level. So we associate it with that. But it's a great conversation point and a welcome one, because it brings up the point that outreach in the church, in the Episcopal Church especially, has so many levels and so many layers of coordination that make it work well.
So that was a good question. Thank you.
Okay. So also back to the CPG resources, I pulled this at a glance sheet from the annual report because not every vestry member knows the extent of how CPG supports the employees of the church, clergy and lay, active and retired, all the way from retirement readiness to equipping ministry after clergy are retired, clergy and lay retired for years. I mean, this resource it's the everlasting cruise line, and it ensures that everything is taken care of. It's a wellness cruise, a retirement cruise. It's international. Everyone is briefed on safety and when to don their life jackets. Most never even want to get off the ship. And what I mean by that is that they remain inspired to be involved in ministry in some way. And talk about message of hope for our church, the value of our healthy and well and sustained clergy and lay who are retired and still love it. They're not running to the hills. This resource provides a tremendous amount of interaction and engagement, equipping and safeguarding their resources. So they have comparative statistics that CPG can share. Sometimes it's with a bishop, comparing to a diocesan province. Sometimes it's with administrators, pointing out large themes that we want to be aware of as how the church is being changed and how things might need to be tweaked. These are important conversations to tweak our system for the future of our church. They inform and they set perspective, and they just don't work well without good data. I'm going to go to the next one if that's okay based on our time.
Mm-hmm.
Because the fourth piece that starts to layer on, this is where the magic happens. You think of the one vessel and little or no transparency on where this boat is, little framework for where he's going or the data input for decisions. You place that vessel in the system of governance where there's a safety net, always listening, where there's monitoring on behalf of all, proactive patrols and direct communications. The 111 dioceses of our church, each of them with a bishop, serving their local areas in different ways. There's different frameworks, and just to give you some examples that I've seen recently, we in Southwest Florida have a diocesan vestry retreat once a year. That's a great circle of communication for us. The Diocese of Central Gulf Coast incorporates their parochial report data in the bishop's visitation in a dashboard that he has and uses while he meets with the congregation. The Episcopal Diocese of Washington is regionally carrying out strategic discovery sessions with local leaders to collaborate. And we just had Southwest Florida hosted the Diocese of Connecticut with their collaborative approach because there's a lot we can share diocese to diocese. The goal is to get us talking in the right framework, to create the energy and a catalyst for action, that action being mission, and to challenge each other to be daring, to be accountable. These dioceses, these bishops, this is an aspect of structural support that is uniquely ours and has equipped the Episcopal Church for 200 years. And why? There is no better time than now than to be inspired on why by a presiding bishop. At the website for the episcopalchurch.org, it is so wonderfully laid out and available. Videos, marks, ways of love, materials. If you want to increase your personal confidence, if you want to strengthen your call or trigger your faith and reason for action, look at the marks of mission. Look at the Jesus movement. Look at the way of love. They all tie deeply to the communities that we live in, which brings me back to measuring mission. And the last component, on top of all of the others, like Maslow's hierarchy, the self-actualization, top of the triangle, is anticipated impact. Remember I told you about the parochial report where we identified this is the actual form and what it looks like, where you label how many people are doing what in the areas of mission. Well, we got that in 2017 and looked at the summaries and made a little chart, which you see here on the right, for which churches were doing the most in whatever category. And then I made some calls because we were about 4 days away from our vestry retreat. In those 4 days, we had so many responses to wanting to tell more about what they were doing, wanting to explain and send pictures and tell in the most inspiring way what it was that was behind those numbers. So our staff, we just pasted everything that came in. 20 different churches answered our question. And I'm going to give that to you as one of the exhibits, because what you will see in that is good old raw, hey, I'm excited about our ministry. And you can take that and turn it into an endowment, perhaps an Episcopal Charities endowment that continues to propagate the impact for that. But the key to being inspired at that local level is finding that piece that inspires you. So take a look, because not only can you take a look at the way the Southwest Florida numbers worked out, you can download or ask your diocese to download the information for their 2017 and 2018 years. And just try it, just breathe it, just say it send out an email saying who wants to talk about what their total was. Because the resource here is all of our congregations. The resource here is like the parable of Luke and the stories of the Good Samaritan mariners out at sea. It's helping each other. It's the congregations helping each other. And through all of that building up, from the accountability to each other to the circle of communication and knowing what's going on with all of its data, You get things happening like churches, for example, from other dioceses, sending unsolicited gifts of prayers and gift cards after a hurricane. You get a church who has an eminent domain gift come in, and they take 10% of it to share with their sister congregations in their deanery to help with similar capital campaign issues. You have people adopting campers when they don't have youth in their own church, or helping to helping to sustain by paying off debt for a Jubilee Center because they're right in the heart of where the ministry needs to happen. Just like congregations that generated the leadership and the financial resources to plant congregations throughout our history, they're doing so today. This is what inspires the congregations. This is what inspires all of us. They're all financial management challenges and solutions, and they're not silver bullets, but they're part of a system of support that has existed for 100, 200 years. Our collaborative mission is sustainable. I mean, 200 years ago, the strategic visioning probably did not expect to consider tracking anything other than the looks on the faces of the parishioners sitting next to them, or clergy working or let alone living past 50 in a comfortable financial retirement, surviving fires, let alone hurricanes and other liabilities, or mobilizing mission via messages through the cloud. The next 200 years we will continue to be thrilled to see the same endowment and capital structures in place, functioning, flexible legacies established by the past generations, tweaked by the current for the future generations. Sustainability in 100 different ways as a routine focus. Significant, potentially catastrophic risks, clearly understood and managed, and articulating and measuring mission, using it as our guide. By the way, there's a really great webinar by Canon Jones also on this website. So if we incorporate these 5 key components as a system of that integrated support, you've seen them here one by one, you'll know what inspires congregations to make sound financial management a priority. I'd like you to remember a week from now that it's not just for some of us, nor is it based solely on the sum of us, but equipped with a robust perspective in all kinds of weather, and with the data and the safety nets and everyone who's ever listening and always ready. Each and every congregation navigates unafraid, prepared for, and utilizing the experience of those around us. So it's contagious. It's bittersweet, and it's joyful, and it's challenging, and it's intentional, and it's contagious. So hopefully this webinar has caught your interest in some way.
Well,
Even just one.
We do have a few questions that came in, though. Do you mind if we tackle some of them? Okay, someone asked, how does sound financial management balance with the Book of Common Prayer or the Bible and spiritual growth? That's kind of a big question.
Absolutely. I mentioned the parable of Luke. I would start to talk about the spirituality of fundraising in general. You know, Henry Nouwen is a great example and resource for that. The sense of community and interconnectedness and how we serve and build for the future, honoring our tradition, the mercy and mission, all of that is biblical, and I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, I would echo Henry Nouwen's Spirituality of Fundraising is an excellent, very easy and quick read, but he, almost every single sentence or every statement he makes, he backs it with biblical verse. And so if you want to know how spiritual fundraising or financial management goes along with the Bible and or Common Prayer, I mean, that is definitely a fantastic resource to have on your bookshelf. Okay, another person asked, if your congregation needs to balance budget from reserve accounts to stabilize the congregation one time, what are the downsides of this?
Oh, I get that question a lot, and the answer is make a 3-year plan. So prove it. Make a 3-year budget that shows that it's one time, and more likely it's a ramp I would say to ramp down. But that a 3-year budget, 1-year budget is the tool that you want to prove that, to share that, and communicate that with the congregation.
That's great. Well, any last questions, feel free to get them in. As I said before, we were going to have this, the recording and the slides and all of the other supporting documents that Canon Ann Vickers has just shared with us today, probably sometime tomorrow. And if you are a registrant, received an invitation to join the webinar, you will also get this in an email, so with the link directly. So with that, Anne, we're so grateful for the time that you've spent. You're always so engaging, and I'm grateful for your expertise and your ministry in this church. It's so wonderful, and I'm super grateful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for having me, and please feel free to call.
Bye, everyone.